Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Wandering Road podcast. I'm your host, Chris, alongside my co host, Dean. He's back from the zoo. Hope you had a good time. And joining us for today's show is one half of the paranormal investigator group, Cole and Tate. Welcome to the show, Cole.
Hey, welcome in.
Hey guys, thank you so much for having me. It's a real honor to be on here and chat with you guys.
Whoa, I don't know about honor. We're not there yet. Hopefully someday. That'd be nice.
No, sir,
But I
we are
appreciate it.
majestic. We're
Yeah,
majestic.
we're humble and majestic.
Yes.
Appreciate you. Well, it's the first time I've ever been interviewed. I've interviewed lots of people before on like old YouTube channels and stuff. So this is the first time anyone's reached out to interview me. So I feel pretty special. So for me, it's an honor. So thank you guys.
Yeah, we got a chance to check out your TikTok. A lot of the videos are great. Like I love they're very succinct but they're very interesting, and you have really like captivating stuff that you find. By the way, if I probably kind of sound sick, I'm getting over something, so I apologize for that. But
You got
so the videos
Rona.
I know. I hope not. Oh my God. I was wheezing last night, and I was like, please don't have the freaking Corona again.
You
after all
better
that
not.
shit.
You're supposed to be here stateside next
I know.
next week, man.
I'm traveling like tomorrow. I'm hoping it'll like this is just bronchitis or something, and it'll shield me from all the other bullshit on the plane. But we'll see. I think I'll be fine. But anyway, your TikToks and stuff, they're very awesome to the point, but they're also very captivating. I really like the ones where you capture the EVP recordings. There were some recent things you put out, like the Sally House and Peace Church Cemetery. So those are just points of discussion if you want to talk about it on the show today, but the floor is yours, man. What do you want to talk about? You want to start back at the beginning, like your first paranormal experience?
Yeah, sure. So for me, I guess my interest in the paranormal kind of began really when I was a kid. I was really into like the ghost hunting shows, like Ghost Adventures and Ghost Hunters and Taps and all that. So I'd watch that growing up. I was also really into cryptids. I remember watching shows like Finding Bigfoot and being really into that as well, and super interested in pretty much anything strange or like folklore, stuff like that. I've always just been fascinated with the aliens, ET stuff, like, UFO abductions, like all of that since I was as young as I could remember. I mean, I've always been fascinated with any of, those type of things. And so that's kind of where my interest began. I had some stuff as a kid happen to me, like my house wasn't anything crazy. I didn't grow up in like, some crazy, haunted house or anything like that, where we just had like crazy activity all the time. But there was a few times here and there where like me and my sister growing up would have some weird stuff happen. And so I remember seeing like a weird orb as a kid at my house growing up. So I don't know. It wasn't an old house, so if there's anything there, it would probably have to be connected to like the land or something. I kind of speculate on that with my sister every now and then. Tatum, who's not here, she's my wife. She's the other, the other counterpart of the channel. I do my investigations with her. It's our channel. She unfortunately couldn't make it today. She grew up in and I wish she was here to talk about this because I can't do it justice, but she grew up in a very, very extremely haunted house where they had like a lot of crazy stuff happen activity wise, and just really just almost traumatizing, actually. So I would say that's kind of where her interests, I guess, began. She's experienced it since she was a kid, and I guess I have too, just to a lesser extent. But like I said, I've always been super fascinated with these type of things and researching these things since I was very young.
Out of curiosity, do you happen to know any stories offhand that Tatum shared with you?
So Tatum grew up in Missouri, and I'm from Oklahoma. And she lived in this house, and it was close to, I can't remember the name of the hospital or anything like that. She grew up close to like a very old hospital. And I think I bring that up because I think she kind of, my memory serves me correctly, they kind of speculate that maybe it was something connected to that. There was some messing around with a Ouija board and a whole bunch of other stories. And when they were younger, her and her siblings, and just she'd tell me stories of they would all sleep in the living room together because they would see apparitions. The Ouija board thing that I brought up just a few seconds ago, something to do with like two children supposedly coming through the Ouija board saying that they passed away in a house fire near the home, and all these different things, and they were looking for their mom and their dad and stuff like that. Obviously you could speculate if was that truly children or not, because I don't believe that's the case personally, but definitely some weird stuff going on. Like I said, apparitions, voices. They had a paranormal team come investigate their home at one point, and I think they ended up leaving because of how terrifying supposedly the stuff going on there was. So it was like next level stuff, and she tells me about it all the time. And I wish I had a better memory so I could actually kind of recount her stories and do a little bit more justice. Like I said, if she was here, she'd do a lot better job obviously than me, but just
Maybe we can do like Like
A
maybe we could do like a
two-parter,
part
right?
2 or
Yeah,
sometime,
Yeah.
like
absolutely.
when she's
Yeah.
available. But if I can roll back really quickly to your experiences, because it sounds like it's a pretty stark contrast to what your wife went through. I find that really fascinating, which would be really awesome to talk to you guys both at some time to kind of get those two sides from the mouth. But you said something very that struck my interest like right away. You said you had a light orb in your house. I had a similar experience as well, and I don't really talk to too many people who have light orb experiences. I think we talked to somebody recently who had something like that, but it was like kind of floating in the forest at a distance sort of thing. And but this is more intimate. It sounds like where it was actually in your house, and that's actually one of my first memories is seeing like a bright light in the corner of the room,
Hmm.
like up near the ceiling, the very, very tippy corner of the room. I would love to hear like some speculative stories or ideas that you guys have talked, because you said you guys speculate on it from time to time. Can we just dive into that real quick? Because I want to hear more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. My case with the whole light thing. So what happened to me was I remember we had a bunch of animals growing up in my home in Oklahoma. We kind of lived, I don't want to say out in the country, but we had some property and we had like ducks and all this different stuff, goats, whatever, a bunch of random animals. It's kind of weird. But anyway, so, we grew up doing that. And then, so we're outside. It was kind of late at night and we were feeding some of the animals. And I remember I was with my stepdad and we're outside and the brick wall as part of the house, is one of the bedrooms that kind of comes out when you're in the backyard. There's a brick wall that sticks out there. And I just remember I looked up at the brick wall and there was just this big like light and it's like a perfect circle almost. And it was there for like a split second and then it was gone. It wasn't anything intense or whatever, but I remember I looked at my stepdad and it was just confusing. And I was like, do you have a flashlight? And he
Yeah,
was
like,
like,
did you see that?
yeah. I was like, you don't have a flashlight, do you? Because it kind of looked like someone just pointed a flashlight and it was just me and him back, in the backyard. And he just looked at me and he goes, what? And I'm like, do you have a flashlight for some reason, Because I was thinking, well, maybe it's dark. Maybe he brought a flashlight out for some reason. He's like,
Right.
no, I don't.
Yeah.
He was like, no, why? And I just, oh, nothing. I didn't really say much about it, but it was just this big ball of light that was there up against the brick wall that was there for literally just half a second, if that. Visually, that's about it when it comes to stuff that happened in my house growing up.
What did you guys speculate that was? I mean, you were talking about the animals and stuff like that. Do you think that it was a benign entity, or if it was something like, because it sounds like you're open to the idea that it was or was not something paranormal because it was so fast. If it were to be paranormal, what would you speculate specifically it could have been? Did it feel like a bad aura, good aura, or was it just fascinating?
It was interesting. If it was paranormal, like I said, my house growing up wasn't an old house at all. So if it's something connected to the property, it would have to be something to do with the land. Whether, I don't know, someone,
Sure, yeah.
you know what I mean? Something like that. I also remember my grandfather passed away not too long before that incident occurred. And I remember when he passed away, there would be nights where I felt like I was being watched a lot. And even as a kid, I kind of looked at that. I was like, I think that's probably, Papaw. That's what we called him, Papaw. That's probably Papaw, And so there was a brief moment where I kind of I thought back on that moment and thought, well, could that have been Papaw, whatever, I don't know. But like I said, I could see it being something like that. Or like I said, something connected to that property for whatever reason.
Yeah, that's cool. I like that story. I'll stick with the Papaw. That sounds
Yeah.
more
A little less
calming
scary.
and
Yeah,
alluring.
yeah.
A little less scary. He's just worming around the property
Yeah,
to
just
take
checking up
care of
on
you
it. Yeah.
guys. Yeah. So, Cole, how did you guys get into the whole paranormal investigation stuff?
Like I brought up earlier, I was really into cryptids growing up. I was really into like Sasquatch and Dogman and like those type of things, like the monsters and all that. I initially, before I got into paranormal, I got really into cryptid research. On one of my old channels, I'm not affiliated with this channel anymore. I'm not part of it, but the channel is called MHS Network. It was me and a couple buddies that did that channel together. We made a documentary a few years ago now, probably, about Bigfoot. It was called Expedition Alone, A Quest for the Oklahoma Sasquatch. Again, I'm not affiliated with the channel anymore or any of the uploads on there currently, but when I was there, we uploaded that documentary. We had a lot of fun with that. And that was kind of my springboard, so to speak, into researching these weirder type phenomena or whatever. I got super into that. I'm currently a member of a cryptid research group called Red Dirt Cryptids. It's run by a guy named Brian Terrell. He does a lot of great research for Oklahoma and southern Kansas, and that's his passion, is collecting reports and doing research, boots on the ground type stuff. And it's still something I still do. I haven't had a chance to really do it recently like I wish I could, but it's just you have to have the time to actually go out for an entire weekend out in the woods and things like that, and it's just not always easy to do that. But So that was my first real start getting into, like I said, investigating weirder phenomena type stuff. And I guess I kind of, again, I was always interested and wanted to get into paranormal stuff. And then I think once I started doing the cryptid stuff, it just became easier to go ahead and, try it out. And I remember I got an EMF meter and went to, there's this haunted park in Tulsa, or at least, well, a lot of people think it's haunted, that I went out there with an EMF meter. And so it became, getting, spirit box and REM pods and, all this other equipment. And then I eventually got, my wife Tatum, once we talked about it, and she was always interested in that as well. It's both common interests that we both had, and we started doing it, and that was about it, really. We just both wanted to do it, and so we did.
So I want to stick on the cryptid stuff here for a minute because I'm fascinated by cryptids as well. Dean and I, we covered, we did a few cryptid episodes. Dean, I think our previous one, the last one we did was
Goat Man.
Yeah, the Goat Man. The Goat Man, running around with an axe and breaking into people's tool sheds and shit.
Oh, wow.
But in your research that you've done about cryptids, what's your belief about cryptids in general? Do you think some are just complete bullshit, or is there some legitimacy based off of solely what you found?
I mean, cryptids out there that do sound a little goofy to me. I can't think of any off the top of my head, but I'm sure a lot of it is, just pure legend and whatever, But when it comes to stuff like, especially Sasquatch and Sasquatch reports, I'm definitely a full-on believer. I've talked to so many people. I've interviewed guys like Ron Moorhead, who captured the Sierra Sounds audio. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that or not, but if not, I recommend you check that out. It's a really interesting piece of audio evidence that was captured, I want to say back in the late 70s by Ron Moorhead and another guy who I can't remember his name, unfortunately. But it's to say, I think, one of the most compelling pieces of evidence for, these type of creatures or whatever. I've done a lot of research into the Patterson Gimlin film, things like this. Obviously, the famous footage of the Sasquatch walking in the creek and everything like that. And I do believe, especially, like I said, when it comes to Sasquatch, that's a real legitimate, I don't know what it is. When you talk to people, a lot of researchers on the Bigfoot phenomena, you're going to get a lot of different stuff. You're going to have people who fall into what's called the flesh and blood camp, where they believe that Sasquatch is just a relic hominid or, some type of, unidentified primate. You'll hear theories of Gigantopithecus and things like this or whatever. So you have people in that camp, and then you have people in a more, they're called woo. I think it's kind of a silly term. I think it kind of comes off a little closed-minded when people talk like that about other people. But they're called woo. And these are the people who think, Sasquatch and a lot of these cryptids, not just Sasquatch, but, Dogman, Mothman, whatever, could be more like ETs or interdimensional type creatures. And so, to be honest with you, if I had to pick, I really don't know. That's when people ask me what I think Sasquatch is or what I think Dogman is. My response is usually, I don't know, because I really don't. No one knows. I try not to take a single solitary position on it just because I see both sides. But if I had to pick, I do lean more towards the woo thing. I started off being very much this is an unidentified primate that lives in North America. But really, when you talk to more and more eyewitnesses, and if you keep an open mind with some of the experiences and encounters that people have with these creatures, whatever they are, the more you start to realize, because then you get into areas of mind speak and cloaking and all this stuff that sounds crazy, but really so many people have experienced this, at least if you believe the eyewitnesses and what they talk about. And I think there's other factors there as well that kind of help point to that direction. But anyway, that's kind of my gist on that, I guess.
I'm 100% with you on if Bigfoot is a real entity, I would lean more towards, based off of the stories I've heard and the research that I've seen, it does make more sense that it's some kind of either spiritual or, like you said, extraterrestrial or cloaking, or there's something else going on. And that's not just an excuse for some people who would roll their eyes and be like, oh, you're just trying to find reasons to say that this thing is real, but we can't find it. The fascinating thing to me about Bigfoot, and I'm still very much on the fence about whether or not it's real, but I think that there is a good amount of evidence that suggests that there's something strange going on, because some of the videos we see where, it's okay, that's clearly in the distance. That guy could just be in a suit. But there are other instances where this is pre-AI and it looks pretty compelling. Like you said, the sounds and the noises that have been run through scrutiny and stuff like that are scrutinized closely. Mm-hmm. And there's no explanation for what could create that sound. Yet we don't have any physical evidence after 60 years of these stories going around. I would be more in the woo camp if I had to choose. What about you, Chris?
Same camp as y'all.
Yeah.
I'll tell you my two favorite. They're kind of funny stories to me. One is Bigfoot is a pet to extraterrestrials,
Oh
and they
yeah.
just let him down from the ship and let him down to go pee or something, and then they just get into trouble. Like, oh, get back here, you big scamp, or something like that.
Yeah.
And then the other one that is a little heavier, but still equally as interesting. They're like humans who don't die. They're cursed. Like I've even heard some people say from like the biblical days.
Don't even
Where,
go down the Nephilim route.
No. I'm not. No, not Nephilim. Just like I've actually, I don't even know if this is a real thing that's embedded in Bigfoot culture. Maybe you could answer that, Cole. But like I've actually heard a few people say like, no, these are like biblical, like thousands of year old humans who were cursed by God or blessed by God. Like I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm not particularly religious, but like that's just an answer
Nephilim.
that some people say. That's why they survive and they get hidden, because there's some spiritual aspect. They're just like humans, but they were changed into humans who live thousands of years. They grow all this hair and they live in the wild away from modern humans. So I don't know. I just think that's interesting too.
The whole Nephilim thing. I mean, I've heard so many different theories as to what Bigfoot could be. But the Nephilim thing is very popular in the Bigfoot community. There's a lot of people that are convinced that they are like Nephilim, fallen angel, half human, half fallen angel hybrids. And, that's how they kind of use it to explain, why, because obviously they're tall, they're giants, I guess, technically. And so, that kind of explains that. But why, they seem to have sort of like these more mystical, supernatural abilities, so to speak. But yeah, no, that's definitely a very prominent theory in the Bigfoot world for sure. A lot of people are convinced that they are Nephilim.
Hey, Chris, real quick. I don't know if Cole has ever heard this story. This might be a first, but can you tell this gentleman about what we heard from that nice lady who was on our podcast about the glowing nethers of Bigfoot? Remember that story?
Oh, Kristen, Paranormal girl. Yeah, she shared a story about Kristen. If you're listening to this, I'm sorry if I butcher it.
It's a secondhand account, but go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, so the story goes that this lady lives like in a cabin or something in a very secluded area, and every night there was a Bigfoot hounding on the walls of her house, and when she looked outside, it had like a glowing boner.
And she would you missed a key aspect. The key aspect is that she would look out the window and she would see in the distance coming down this hill this glowing object. And then, she, as it got closer, she realized it was a Bigfoot with a glowing dick.
Yeah.
And it would go pound on her wall, like make grunts or whatever. And then she would tell people like, this thing wanted to sleep with me, or like, I don't know, like something like that. I don't know like when this happened or what part of the US this happened in, but I just love that story because I've never heard that before. Have you ever heard anything like that where like Bigfoot wanting to procreate with human women?
Yeah, actually, I have. A lot of the natives have traditions and tales of that, like the hairy, because obviously they don't necessarily call them Sasquatch or Bigfoot. They have their own terms or whatever, and I'm very ignorant on that. So, but oftentimes they'll refer to them as like the hairy giants or the tall ones or something like that. And there's lots of stories and legends of Sasquatch, these giants stealing women from tribes and things like this. So I've heard stories similar to that.
See, that's fascinating too, that if you hear that story about Sasquatches acting irrationally or like tribally or something like that, then if you like psychoanalyze that, it's like, okay, well, that doesn't sound intelligent. That just sounds desperate. That just sounds like an animalistic behavior that is desperate. There's no actual calculation going on unless they need him for like breeding or something. But if that were the case, they would probably be more surreptitious about capturing the women. They wouldn't just go in and beat the shit out of men and take the women away. So like, that's interesting, right? So if there is a spiritual aspect or like a cloaking aspect or even extraterrestrial, that to me, that says that the Bigfoot is itself, the entity itself is animalistic, like it's an animal, but something else is hiding it. And then that's an interesting question as to why. So I don't know if that's worth exploring, but that just popped into my head.
No, that's a great observation, and that's an observation I've made as well. I mean, many people have made that same observation, but something I've noticed as well is, because when you start researching, try to figure out, what are these entities, what are these creatures, you do see, people kind of portray them as like these very benevolent, very like spiritually ascended type entities, guardians of the earth type stuff or whatever, or they're, these interdimensional creatures that can phase in and out of our dimension. They can do all these things. They're very, like I said, spiritually evolved. And some people would say they're even more spiritually evolved than we are. And, like I said, the whole mind speak communication thing that seems to happen a lot with, certain encounters and eyewitness reports where they're speaking telepathically to people. You have like those type of things, but then you also have like, what we were just talking about, these stories of, like you said, where it appears that they engage in very animalistic behavior. And this is what confuses me personally. It makes me wonder, like, well, is there two things kind of going on here? And is it kind of almost being mimicked, so to speak, to like look like
You're a
Sasquatch?
smart dude. You're a
Yeah.
smart dude. I think that you're spot on. Like if there's an explanation there, I was actually thinking of something funny. It's like, back, like, let's say back in those days where women were being taken away from like camps or villages or whatever. It's like, what if it's just a bunch of asshole actual men who are like, they know this story. And they're like, hey, let's just like, we need women. Like, we want to go get women. So let's just dress up like a big hairy. And then like the actual Bigfoots get a bad rap because somebody's trying to exploit, or like you said, some other entity is trying to exploit this creature.
Yeah.
And then people get it confused. So, and then one more thing I'll add before I flip it back is all of the encounters are not just across North America, right? They're across the globe.
Right.
Like the Nepalese, the plains of Russia, like, the ice plains of, like, people have stories all over of these things, even down in like Southeast Asia. In Australia, what's it called? The
Yowie.
It's the one, yeah, the Yowie. Like, it's just crazy. You can also point back, like you said earlier, the Gigantopithecus is an actual creature that we know from fossil records existed that would match the portrayal of a Bigfoot, but we know that they're long, like we're pretty convinced they're long extinct. This is the last take I'll ask you on the Bigfoot question, but like, if you expand it across the globe, what are some of the most enthralling stories you've heard, and what's your take on like the global scale of all these reported sightings?
When it comes to like global reports, I've always found interesting the stories from like the guys in Vietnam, the soldiers in Vietnam who would see the rock apes. I found those stories to be really interesting. My dad was in Vietnam, and I even asked my dad at one point, like, hey, do you ever have anything, and he's like, no. But that's something that a lot of the guys will talk about, soldiers, veterans who served in Vietnam, is encounters with the rock apes. And I think in Vietnam, even, like, if I remember correctly, the government's pretty open to the existence of, I can't remember what they're called, like the proper, I call them the rock apes. That's what a lot of people refer to them as, but there's a more proper term for them that I can't remember off the top of my head. But pretty much, the Sasquatch of Vietnam or whatever, whatever these creatures are. And they've done a lot of like scientific research into it, and they're pretty open to my understanding. And if you talk to, the villagers or whatever, the locals who live in Vietnam who are out, in those areas where they're reported seeing, like, it's just kind of like a common knowledge thing where, like, yeah, these creatures exist. We see them, and, they hide up in the mountains and in the deepest parts of the forest, and they stay away from people. And, so I do find that to be very interesting.
That's actually the first time I've ever heard anything about Vietnam. Have you ever heard of that, Chris?
No, I was about to say that. That's the first time I'm hearing about any Sasquatch in Vietnam. And while you were talking, Cole, I actually looked up the name. There are two names, so I'm probably going to butcher them. The first one is called Batutut or Batutut.
Mm-hmm.
And the other one, Dean, you might know how to pronounce this.
Yes, I mean, is it Vietnamese or is it Chinese?
It's
I don't know
Vietnamese. I think it's Vietnamese.
I don't know how to speak Vietnamese. I got nothing. They got like 9.
Your wife is Vietnamese, right?
They got like 9 tones. She's never she taught me like 2 words, and like I focus on Mandarin. That's all I got. You got Mandarin, I'll pronounce that shit.
And Goy Rung, I don't know.
I know in China they're called the Yeren. I know that, and I know there's the Yowie.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But that's all I know. I can't remember the proper name and pronunciation, but yeah, I just refer them as the rock apes. So,
I mean, according to my wife, I am a rock ape. So, whatever she shouts at me in Vietnamese all the time, I'll just assume that's rock ape.
Yeah, she like, did you just call me a rock ape?
That's funny.
That was a nice side conversation about cryptids and Bigfoot. That I did not expect. So
I love it.
I hope the listeners enjoyed that too, because I enjoyed that conversation. So let's segue into some of the locations that you guys actually did investigations. So you provided us a list here, but I kind of want to jump around a little bit and start with the Jesse Creek Cemetery?
So Jesse Creek, that's actually a more recent one. I haven't posted that one yet. I just finished editing the actual investigation part, but that's the most recent location I went to and investigated. It's just a well-known cemetery. There's not a lot to it. It was an old like pioneer cemetery where a lot of the early settlers, I guess, are buried when before Oklahoma was even a state, when people started coming in and settling here. Just really old. I mean, there's headstones there that go back to the 1800s. And it's just been long rumored to be haunted by locals, and lots of people have gone out there to investigate. It's just a well-known spot, and I've always wanted to go there, so we went and investigated. It was pretty interesting. We had some cool stuff with like the REM pod go off. It was nothing like spectacular or like, oh my gosh level stuff, but I would definitely say it's definitely active. I would say for sure that was a fun one. I really enjoyed that.
What did you guys capture while you were there?
When we went there, we did a lot of stuff with the REM pod there. That was the main primary thing that we got was REM pod going off. Whenever you're in like outdoor locations, you're kind of limited to a certain extent because you can't really, I mean you can, but like EVP sessions and digital recorder stuff, you have a lot, obviously you're outside, you have a lot of outside noise, you got cars driving by, you have animals, whatever, you got bugs, you got insects. So those are things you have to keep in mind because those are all things that are kind of like, so to speak, kind of like spoiling your audio to a certain extent, to where if you did get something, if it's not super clear, then it's kind of up in the air as to what that could be. Like I said, you're kind of limited on that. So we kind of relied a lot on like the REM pod. We did some spirit box stuff. I had two buddies out there with me, two good friends of mine that were out there investigating with me that night. And so we did like the Estes method where, you're using the SP7 spirit box. I'm sure you've heard of it maybe, but you put the headphones on. The purpose of it is to eliminate bias. So like when you ask questions, they can't hear you asking questions. They're just repeating what they're hearing over the spirit box. Because otherwise, if you're doing like a live spirit box, the problem with that is, you could ask a question like, hey, how old are you? And you're waiting and kind of anticipating to hear a number. And so that can kind of, make you biased towards what's actually being said through the spirit box. So when you do an Estes method, though, for example, and I ask, how old are you? As long as the person can't hear me, they reply back 22 or something like that. Then that's a little bit more interesting, when you get intelligent, relevant responses like that. So we were doing that. We were running some of like our ITC apps and stuff where they kind of work like an Obvious, where it spits out words or phrases. And I guess what was most interesting about that night, I remember David, we were having him go under for the Estes method. And it was his first time ever doing an Estes. It was his first time actually investigating, like paranormal investigating. So he went out there and we had him do the Estes method. And his was really interesting because he would say something, and at almost every single time he said something, the ITC device would go off and say something, and then the REM pod would go off at the exact same time. It wasn't necessarily even like sequential where like, he said something and then like 10 seconds later, the REM pod kind of goes off for a second. But like literally at one point in the video, I can't remember what he said. I think he said the phrase like hot out. He heard hot out. And so he said hot out. And then boom, boom, the REM pod and the ITC all go off at the same time. And so that was kind of a cool moment. And that happened a few different times during the Estes.
In your opinion, and all of the experience you've had, what would you say is like your rough estimate of the probability of all those going off like that in that style? It sounds like it's really rare.
Yeah, kind of. And the thing is, so like when we do, like that's what I like to do. So like when we do like an Estes method, I like to run as much equipment as possible at the same time. I know some people, they just, they do an Estes and they focus on the Estes, and that's fine. But for me personally, I always find it really cool and really compelling, if we have like an EMF meter, like for example, at Sally House, when, Tate and I were doing our Estes method up in Sally's room upstairs, we had the EMF meter, and we also had, Spirit Talker going on in the background. And what I like about that is a lot of times we'll get full phrases or almost sentences, so to speak. So like, for example, I'll say something if I'm under an Estes method, for example, and I'll spit out a phrase that's like half a sentence. A lot of times a spirit talker will come and will complete that sentence, and it's kind of weird, or it's just some type of relevant response to what's being talked about or being asked during the Estes. And then at the same time, if we have the EMF meter, like I was talking about with Sally House, there's lots of times where if you go back and watch that video, we're getting full hits to the red on the EMF meter while we're doing the Estes session, the Estes method session. So that's kind of, it doesn't happen a whole lot. In regards to what you're asking with like going off the exact same time, for me personally, that's the first time that's ever happened so far, where at the exact same time,
wow,
everything goes off like that. But definitely, yeah, it's an interesting thing. Yeah.
You briefly, in your response just now, you mentioned with the SS method and you guys investigated the Sally House. Why don't you give us a little bit of background on what the Sally House is and how'd you guys end up there and what did you encounter?
Yeah, so Sally House, it's in Atchison, Kansas, and Atchison is a very old haunted town, and a lot of people say it's one of the most haunted towns in America, not just even in Kansas, but in America in general. There's tons of very haunted locations in Atchison, and Sally House is very iconic. It's been a while since I've read up, so like, and I'm always my memory itself is very bad, so I'm going to kind of butcher the history of this place. So I apologize beforehand, especially for the listeners who are like more knowledgeable on this than I am, and or just have a better memory, honestly, than me. But Sally House, pretty much the thing is with Sally House was back in, I want to say like maybe the 80s or the 90s. There was a family, I think they were the Pickmans, if I remember correctly, and I remember it was Tony Pickman, and I want to say his wife was Deborah Pickman. Hopefully, I'm getting that right. But they moved into the home. They had their child with them at the time, who was just, I think, a baby. Honestly, I think they had just had their child. And Tony was getting scratched really bad by this Sally entity. And there's a famous sketch of Sally that you can Google and find online. It's kind of creepy. But her backstory, according to one of the psychics that they had go there, was that she was dying of appendicitis. And there was a doctor who lived inside the home, like a surgeon or something like that. And Sally's mom brought Sally to the surgeon who lived in this home to perform like this emergency surgery because she was dying. And she died on the operating table while he was trying to save her, is the lore and the story, so to speak. I've tried to research that, and from my research, there's no actual documentation to prove that ever happened, the whole Sally story. And a lot of investigators, including myself, believe that the Sally entity is a demonic, non-human entity. That's honestly kind of the predominant kind of consensus when it comes to the Sally House, that it's not actually a child spirit. Because Tony, I don't know if I said this already or not, but he would get scratched very severely and like burned and scratched by this entity. And it got to the point where they had to leave the home. And so it's kind of it's a big paranormal hotspot. A lot of investigators go there to investigate. And I've always wanted to go there. And, Tatum was obviously wanting to go. So we just went. And that's kind of the background of, how we got into the Sally House.
So you guys end up going to the Sally House. So what did your investigations yield while you guys were there? Did you encounter anything during your investigation or in any of the evidence you captured afterward?
First thing we really noticed was as soon as we walked in was how heavy just the atmosphere of the house was. It was something, and we'd been to Villisca before that, and with Villisca, you're talking about a house where an entire family was murdered. 6 children, 2 parents. So we had been in very dark, heavy places before. It's hard to put into words, but we walked in and it was just very heavy, like a very heavy feeling. We kind of walked around. We were just looking around downstairs. Then we decided to go upstairs to look at Sally's room. There's a point, if you go back and watch that video, there's a point in the video where I'm walking up the stairs. Tatum's filming me and she's still at the bottom of the stairs. She's just kind of, up filming me walk up. And I had to stop about halfway upstairs because you could feel just a shift. It's hard to explain that, but you just feel a shift in the energy, quote unquote. A lot of people throw that word around, energy. I don't know, but it was just a weird feeling in the air and the atmosphere of the home. And it just got very heavy and very difficult to breathe. And we went upstairs and it was just as heavy as it was downstairs. It was even heavier upstairs. And it was just this feeling of like get the hell out. Like, I don't want you in this house right now. And so we left actually to go, because we had to go get some stuff from batteries and stuff, because we got there early in the day. We were just getting there to get familiar, get our equipment in there, and then we left to go eat. And then we came back, and when we came back, the mood was much lighter. It was much, much lighter. And it's another thing we made note of in the video too, when we filmed our intro portion talking about the history of the home. And we even read some of the letters from prior investigators who left notes there in the journal that they have there at the Sally House where they talk about their experiences and stuff. We made note of that. And even upstairs, it just felt very light. It felt very comfortable. It didn't feel bad at all. And so, but then later on in the investigation, and it kind of fit too, because when we started investigating, there was one point we did a flashlight thing. And this is something that a lot of investigators do, where they do yes or no type questions. And then if the flashlight turns on, that's a yes or no or whatever, and so we tried that out because we had read in one of the diaries, I think, that people had success with that. And so we got our flashlight out. It's a mag light. And we just started asking questions of, who's here. And one of the stories there of one of the entities, I guess, that people think could be haunting the Sally house is like the spirit of an old woman who fell down the stairs. Now, again, I don't know if that's true. I don't know if it ever happened or not, but that's just one of the things that we read about. And so we were communicating with whatever this was. And I asked at one point, is this Sally? And it essentially answered, no, it's not Sally. And I said, are you the old woman who fell down the stairs? And it answered yes to that. So we just kind of went with that. Now, again, whether or not that's true, if it was really the entity or spirit of an old woman who fell down the stairs, I question that. But I was just going with what I was getting at the time, And so, but it was pretty much the gist of it was that Sally was not there at that time, or Sally was not wanting to interact or whatever, which is what it felt like. It felt like whatever the Sally entity was not there at the time, which is why we weren't getting the heavy feeling. But when we went upstairs to Sally's room and started doing the Estes method, we started getting stuff like he's here on the spirit talker. And even before that, me and Tatum both looked at each other and that feeling started coming back of that really heavy, dark, like, get the hell out of here. I don't want you in here right now. You need to leave, stuff like that. And we started getting Sally over the Estes, over the spirit box, like really clear. And I remember even being like a man's voice, which made it even creepier because, Sally's supposed to be this little girl. And we keep getting like this deep man's voice saying Sally over and over. We kept getting stuff about something about someone being stabbed. I don't know why we got that so much. I'm not familiar with anything like that. I tried to think, well, maybe it's connected to the story of the surgery or whatever, but that didn't really make sense. But we kept getting that over and over. And even during like the Estes method, we got that on the spirit talker. He was stabbed. I was stabbed. That kept coming through a whole bunch. But that was definitely, I think, the main kind of thing I got from that investigation is the Sally entity, whatever it is. It's not there all the time, I don't think. I think it kind of goes to different locations. And again, I can go deeper down the wormhole in that because that kind of connects to like Villisca a little bit. So yeah.
Yeah, by all means.
Villisca, like I said earlier, that's also a very well-known, very popular paranormal haunted house. Back in sometime in the 1800s, I believe, the Moore family and two neighborhood girls who were friends with the Moore children, they were spending the night. They went to their church service there at some Presbyterian church there in Villisca that the family attended to. And so the Moore parents, I can't remember their names. I want to say I know Sarah Moore was the mother. I can't remember the name of the children or whatever, or the husband. But anyway, the Moore family, they went back to their home in Villisca after they attended church. And like I said, they had two other children there that were friends that were spending the night with them. So it was 6 children total in the home. And they all were killed in the home. That crime still has not been solved. There's multiple suspects involved with that crime. It's a very awful, horrible thing. And a lot of people believe that the killer is actually haunting that location still, even more so than they believe like that the children are. A lot of people think that stuff with like that they get relating to like the Moore family in the home, paranormal activity wise, could be more like residual. But they think when it comes to like the intelligent haunting that takes place there, they think that a lot of people believe that the spirit of the killer, the murderer, is the one haunting the location.
So do people think that it was an actual like demonic spirit or something that committed the murders, or do they think that someone actually did it, but when they died, they're still on location?
So one of the suspects was Reverend Kelly. If I had to pick someone who I thought did it, Reverend Kelly to me, I think, is probably the one who did it. When you research that case, there's a lot of things. He ended up confessing to the crime, but he was found not guilty because my understanding is the jury was convinced that it was kind of a coerced confession. And again, I'm going based off memory here because it's been a while since I've read up on this case and everything. He was saying stuff about how when he gave his confession, how this evil, dark, demonic entity handed him the axe and told him to murder the family. He had a prior history of a lot of weird, sketchy stuff as well. He was talking about how a family in Villisca had died like the day after the murders had occurred, before news even got out of the fact that they were even killed. There's a whole bunch of other sketchy stuff he did that made people think that he was probably the killer. He matched about the height, because if you go to the home too, you can still see the marks from the axe on the ceiling, which is very, very creepy. But they estimate the killer would have been like a certain height in order for that to happen. And they also, through the investigation, I believe, kind of speculated that he was probably left-handed. and Reverend Kelly matched the bill and all that. I believe he was left-handed. He was around the correct height he would have had to been, and he confessed to it too. All those things kind of line up, and so a lot of people think he did it. In regards to your question, though, yeah, a lot of people do believe that there was a sort of demonic, thing, at least according to Reverend Kelly, connected to that killing.
So, not to take it back to the Sally house too deeply, but you did mention that it sounded like earlier that you personally had a sense that this was more demonic than anything. And I guess my question to you would be, what dictates whether or not you feel like something is going to be demonic, or it's more likely that the thing is demonic than as opposed to like a previous human? Because I know I'm not really deep in the Christian faith. Chris is, because he's Catholic, but through the conversations we've had in the past, I know more.
What'd
now
you say about me?
I said I love you, man. You're a great guy. No, I just said you're Catholic. So like you know more about the demonic side and all that stuff than
Oh,
me.
no. I don't know more.
More than me. Me.
Okay. I was about to
come
say,
on,
dude,
mister.
I don't
You
know
grew up in a demonic house. Like, come on.
bro.
Okay.
I grew up with potentially a demon, but I don't know what the fuck that thing is, man.
Well, that was my question to Cole, was like, so he's experienced this before, like firsthand, and he's actually going out interacting with this stuff, which is really heavy.
Which I would
But, like,
never do, so I commend you.
I know you're constantly doing the cross. I see it over there. You're doing the jiving over there. Sorry. So, but my question to Cole is like, what is your conclusion about whether or not something is demonic or not? Because, and the reason I ask is because it seems like in the world of paranormal investigation, there is an accepted degree of certainty that some of the entities are previously human. And we don't have to go too deep in the philosophy of what that means in the context of religion. Like if there's demons and there's previous humans who are still here on this plane, but then there are others who have ascended to another plane, like that's really deep and heavy. We don't have to go into that if you don't want to. But like from your take, what is the demonic and what fits the bill for you on whether or not something is more likely to be demonic, and what does that mean?
Yeah, that's a great question. So if we want to get into like the deeper, like more theological stuff, I'm down for that. I can be a little bit long-winded.
No, it's cool, man. I love it. Let's do it
beforehand, but yeah, we can definitely, if you guys want to go into that, I'm definitely down. But yeah, when it comes to like the demonic stuff, so it's really hard to say. And I hate saying like, well, you got a feeling, bro. You just got to feel, because that's kind of corny. But sometimes I do think that is the case. I think that you kind of do get, when you go to these places, you do kind of just get a feeling, so to speak, when it comes to, and like I said, like the Sally House thing, I've been to lots of different places where, I do believe it's predominantly like human spirits or whatever attached to location and all that. And you kind of just get that feeling over time. Whereas when you go to something that's like, that has that heaviness and that just, I don't know how to really put a word on it. You just kind of feel that and you get a sense for that. And I've only really gotten that really at Sally House. That's really the only location I could say like there's something demonic there, like for sure. And that's it. It's the Sally House. Now, besides that, a little bit more like concrete reasoning, not just like, oh, I got a vibe, bro, is, a lot of times it's very accepted belief within the research community or the paranormal investigating community that demonic entities really like to mimic children. And you see that all the time. And so anytime I hear about a location that has children, spirits, or something like that, I immediately get very suspicious on that. My, kind of red flag kind of goes off, because I not to say it is for sure a demon at that point. I'm not saying a child spirit couldn't be haunting a location. I think that's possible, but I do get concerned when I start hearing stuff like that, especially if it's like stuff like a more residential haunting, like someone's home, with kids seeing, oh, I have an imaginary friend, and it's his little kid and all that stuff, like that story I was telling about, Tatum with the two little kids. I've even told Tatum, like, Tam, I think you had, some demonic stuff going on there, because that is a ploy that they will use to try to earn your trust, because they want to mimic something innocent, like completely opposite of what they are. Because in my belief in regards to demonic spirits, that they're non-human evil spirits is what I believe they are.
Whatever that thing was in my old house used to show itself to my sister as a little boy in like a 1920s like outfit, like sailor suit outfit. For some reason, they fucking wore those.
Didn't you say your aunt had that dream one night where like, she pressed something against the wall in the dream and said, "You're not going to kill my family," and it like morphed?
No,
into
not
a
my
little
aunt,
girl?
my mom.
Or your mom? Okay, sorry. But that was
Yeah.
something where it morphed into a little girl in the dream.
Yeah. So basically, to recap, Cole, if you didn't listen to that episode, so my mom went around praying, blessing the house, whatever, incense, whatever, right? She gets to a particular room and like the atmosphere gets really thick, feels like something's choking her. So she's like, you know what, screw this. That same night, she goes to sleep. She has a dream that she's in her bedroom and some old lady like appears in the doorway and starts yelling at her, swearing at her, saying, I'm going to kill you and your family because you're trying to kick me out of the house. And my mom, in her dream, she grabbed it by its neck and pinned it against the wall, and it shapeshifted to a little girl for pity.
I've heard very similar stuff to that, and again, that um, when it comes to the demonic stuff, yeah, that the whole child thing is super common, and like you said, it is a ploy for pity. It's a ploy, and you'll hear stuff like, I'm looking for my mommy and daddy type thing, where like people, investigators, researchers, or people just experiencing a haunting, they'll get stuff like that through like EVPs or whatever, that they're looking for their mom or dad, or they're lost, and it is this ploy, like you said, to get pity, to get attention, for you to let your guard down. So, before they reveal what they actually
Yeah.
are.
It does make sense to me too. Like, I'm not trying to be like a bleeding heart or anything, but like, you and I, like we talked before we got on, we have kids and stuff like that. And I'm still on the fence, like, about everything that's going on. Like, I think there's so much more to be discussed about what could be going on, which we could bring up later. But if these are actual entities, and there are actual human entities that are still on this plane of existence that are interacting with our three-dimensional world, I really hope, like hope beyond hope, that the kids who do pass away before they reach maturity are not actually still stuck here. I hope that there's some force of nature that is good and like omnipresent, like I don't know necessarily God or not, but just some force that is of good that would shelter them or take them away from
Right.
being stuck on a plane that's by themselves. So I think I've never heard this before in depth, that you've this idea you've given to us. And I think it's fascinating that, like, when you're talking about children, you're automatically skeptical. Like, or we're talking about children hauntings, you're automatically skeptical, because you would, a rational person would think the same thing. Like, if it's a child who passes away, like, and there's any kind of good in this reality, there should be some entity that helps guide them to the other side, or whatever happens when we die. So it does make sense to me now, after you saying that it would be more likely to be something trying to trick you, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. And it's not to say, I mean, because I don't know. I mean, if you think back to, I'm trying to think of other examples that I've read about, but like the Devil Made Me Do It case, I think his name
Right.
was
Yeah.
David Glatzel, I think was the boy who was possessed. If you read up on that case, when he was at the house near the well where he first encountered that demonic entity or whatever, if you believe the story, some people may be like, I don't
Sure.
believe that actually happened. But, if you
Right.
believe the story, and it's a common thread too with more demonic cases. I believe he said he saw like an old man type entity at first, but then he talked about how from like the waist down, the legs were like that of a goat or something like that. And that's very common too.
Mm.
I think I talked to William Stillman, who's a psychic. I did an interview with him on the topic of evil spirits and the demonic a while back. Again, my old channel, not Cole and Tate. We talked about that. I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I think that was a subject that got brought up during the interview. Is again, another factor to this is that when people see these entities, they appear as a human or whatever, there's always like something off. Like there's always something, and a lot of people will talk about eyewitnesses. They're like, there's something off about its appearance. There was something almost non-human about it. Like I said, like the Devil Made Me Do It case with David Glatzel, if it's, the legs being non-human or something like that, there's always like some giveaway that it's not actually a human entity.
What's crazy is, if you're someone who's a skeptic, which is totally fine, it's okay to be a skeptic. I feel like skeptics would point to something historical or something factual that was like, oh, well, the goat legs, that came about back when the Roman Catholic Church was trying to bastardize like Gaelic, or what's the
The
religion?
Greek pantheon.
Yeah, the Greek pantheon. Thanks, man. So like the Greek pantheon, they're trying to demonize it. They're trying to get Catholics on their side or whatever. So that's why we have like the vision of the goat that so many people relate to demonic nowadays. But that, to me, the more I hear your stories, Cole, like the more it makes sense now, where it's like, well, that might be true, but that doesn't necessarily mean, if there is some entity who's a trickster or trying to fool people, that they won't use that.
Right.
Right. So like, if they know people believe that the demonic or something off has, or maybe even it could be even a good entity that's trying to like slip some hints. Like, you
Mhm.
know, it doesn't necessarily, you don't have to be factual to actually see what's going on if the thing is like, you know, actually an apparition before you. So I don't know. That's interesting, right? Like it doesn't matter that it's goat legs. What matters is you associate that with something that is not good nowadays.
Right. And I agree with that. And I think that's why that is the case. Now, obviously, you could say too, like in like the scriptures, it talks about, goats and like, phrases like separating the sheep from the goats. Goats in the Bible kind of has a more like negative context of being like a counterfeit to like a true follower or something like that in that kind of regard. So, so there is that element as well that it could be trying to pull symbology from like, sacred texts like the Bible on that. I talked to, again, I keep going back to my interviews, but I interviewed a guy a while back years ago, Ralph Sarchi. He was an investigator. He investigated with like Ed and Lorraine Warren when he was younger. He's a well-known demonologist. And I can't remember if this is something we talked about. Again, I hate kind of recalling this because I don't want to put words in people's mouth, but I do believe when I've had conversations like that, I kind of come out of it with the belief, at least in regards to this whole thing we're talking about with like the goat legs or whatever, or like, the ram's head, stuff like that. Because that is, like you said, a very popular depiction of demons for whatever reason. A lot of that comes from, historical context that we don't always take into consideration when we talk about these things. Like the whole, devil, red man with a pitchfork or whatever type thing. But my understanding too is a lot of demonologists, a lot of like religious demonologists will look at that and say that is kind of a mercy from God to help the person who's going through the demonic encounter identify that as a demonic entity. It's like a forced thing where, I guess, so to speak, God allows that to happen, but forces this
Wow.
type of revelation within it to occur. So that way there is this identifying marker for the person to realize like, oh, this is a demonic spirit. This is an evil spirit, so to speak. I don't know if that makes sense or not, but yeah.
No, that's exactly what I was getting at. And you kind of freaked me out that me as like, you know, a non-practicing Christian came to that conclusion that is already well established that like, you know, maybe it is a good entity that is actually slipping some knowledge. Like it
Yeah.
because the evil entity presents itself as a goat, half goat, doesn't mean the entity itself is presenting itself as a half goat. It could be a good force that's slipping that hint. Like,
Right.
oh, maybe there's something, you know, extra here you should pay attention to. That's freaky. That's
Yeah.
freaky.
And it's not even that the entity itself is a goat, whatever, creature or something like that. It's just that
Right.
I think
It's a tip.
oftentimes it's a correspondence. I think oftentimes in spirituality, and this is something that like Emmanuel Swedenborg talks about. I'm not Swedenborgian or anything like that, but I like his writings and I like a lot what he says with his visions and stuff. Is like oftentimes the spirit world communicates with us in correspondences. So everything has a correspondence to the spiritual world. So like things in nature, for example, have a spiritual correspondence. Water represents truth and cleansing and purity and whatever, and the same with like, animals and stuff like that. Like a goat, a ram, obviously in the scriptures has a spiritual correspondence attached to it. And so if these entities are trying to communicate to you, like we were talking about with the little kid, like what is a correspondence with a little kid? It's innocence, it's purity, it's goodness, it's you can trust me.
Right.
So the correspondence with if an entity appears to you with a ram's head is, it's an evil entity, it's something demonic, it's something non-human. So I think that's the main thing.
Yeah, it's like a tip of the halo kind of thing. Like,
Right.
hey, hint, hint.
Mm-hmm.
Did I just hear something in the background? Was that wind or something?
I got wind in the background.
Okay. Fucking hell.
Get your cross out, man.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, that would be funny.
like holy shit. Like, dude, you got to go get your gear, man.
Yeah, right.
There have been times on this podcast where like we've had really like yourself like really great people to talk to, and then weird shit starts happening. Like they either lose their audio or we get cut off or just something freaky happens that has like knocks us back, and it's just a common theme.
Oh wow, yeah, that is creepy. Wow.
So Cole, looking at your list of locations that you've investigated here, the one that I find like that's catching my eye here, if you don't mind us segueing into that, is the haunted daycare.
Yeah. Tate and I have been filming because we quickly learned that the way to go about running a channel with paranormal investigations is not to film one video, one episode, edit it, upload it, film another one, edit it, upload it. We've quickly learned that the best way to go about it is actually filming in batches. And you would think we'd be smart enough to realize that sooner, but I guess not. So we've been working. It's been a while since we uploaded YouTube, but So we've been kind of working on that behind the scenes, filming a bunch of different locations. We have about 3 or 4 locations done, and we're going to upload those here soon, about 1 video a week, and then in the background continue filming and investigating. But one of the locations we did for this upcoming, if you want to call it season or whatever, is this daycare we went to. So I'm not allowed to say the name of the daycare, and even in the video, I have to make sure it's censored for, whatever, because I'm sure, people, parents, want their kid going to like a haunted daycare or something. I don't know. Yeah, right. So I can't reveal the name of it, but it's this daycare, and our friend Whitney, she's been on the channel before. She was in the Peace Church Cemetery video with us. She is a sensitive. I don't know if she would identify as a psychic, just to be safe. I would say she's definitely a sensitive. So she is connected to this daycare and was able to get us into the daycare to investigate at night. And we went there just recently, and that was very, very interesting. We got a whole lot of really good stuff there, and I was really not expecting that to be like a very active location at all. Whitney was telling us how she thinks she senses like a male spirit there because her parents' home isn't far from the daycare. Her parents kind of run the daycare. And so she thinks it kind of goes back and forth. And she kind of the same thing with like Tatum, she had a lot of stuff growing up happened to her as a kid with, activity and paranormal stuff. But we went there again, REM pod going off quite a bit. Super like relevant, intelligent responses on the ITC stuff. At one point I did hear a voice. We didn't really capture it clearly on the camera, which kind of sucks, but that did happen during one of our Estes methods that we were doing, but just super relevant stuff over and over. And at one point, I kind of started asking questions to this male spirit because Whitney was kind of picking up on that in life. He, I guess, was sort of a more aggressive, kind of dominant figure in his household with his family or something like that. So I was asking questions in regards to that, and we were getting like super relevant responses. I remember at one point it told me to stand, because I kept asking it, because she was saying like, well, it feels like the office in the daycare is kind of has a lot more activity. And so we put the REM pod in there. And so we kept asking like, hey, can you turn the REM pod on in the office? And it was telling me to like, it was literally saying like, we were laughing about it. It was like, shut up. We got on the Spirit Talker, we got Spanish Donkey at one point. So it was calling me a jackass. And Tatum and Whitney thought that was just hilarious. They would not stop laughing about that. They were like, oh my gosh, that's so funny. And so I guess I pissed this guy off. I don't know. And so I was kind of going along with it. It's like, hey man, like if you don't want me to go in that office right now, you're gonna have to turn the REM pod on. Otherwise I'm going to get up. And then we got on the ITC device, we got stand up. And so like, oh, you want me to stand up? I'll go and walk over there. And so I stand up and walk, and I go in the office, and then I hear come back. And then I was like, did the ITC just say come back? And they're like, yeah. And so literally it was just all night stuff like that. Just like super relevant activity.
So you got a high school teenage girl. She's like, like you're making fun of her, and she's like, "Oh, don't do that." And like,
Yeah.
You start leaving. Like, guys, I'm done with this. Like, no, wait, come back. I want to talk to you.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, it felt the vibe I was getting was like it was just me being messed with. Like I pissed him off earlier when he was telling me to, because I thought he. It was kind of a funny joke we were making afterwards. I kept calling him old man because we don't know his name. We were trying to get names and stuff. I was like, what's your name? And we weren't getting that. So I was like, okay, well, old man. Because I thought earlier she told me she was old, or he was old. And I guess not. I guess I misheard her. And she was like, she told me, she was like, he doesn't like the fact you keep calling him old. And because again, she's sensitive. So she was kind of picking up on that. And I was like, oh, well, my bad. Sorry.
Too bad.
Yeah, right. So I guess
I like you, Cole. You're a prodder. You prod a little bit. I like that. You're clever and you prod. That's good. It's a good combo.
Yeah. I think you kind of have to in certain, obviously like I'm all about, me and Tatum are big on like being respectful. I don't go there and try to provoke or anything like that. I don't,
you don't walk in and be like, you're a bitch.
Yeah.
Again, that's what you would do, Chris. You would throw
that'd be you, asshole.
Yeah. You want to address any of this shit? I got my friend right here. I'll just attach him to it.
Yeah, right. I try to avoid that. Because I mean, for a lot of reasons, and obviously, if I did, which I wouldn't do that anyway, but if I did, I already know the comments I would get, like you're being disrespectful, you're
right.
being, and so I try to avoid that. I try not to ruffle any feathers, but obviously, like I'm respecting, like I don't, if there's truly deceased people there, or whatever, especially if they're stuck or whatever, like I don't want to be disrespectful. And I feel like that works for us too. Like, I feel like we get more stuff because of that. I feel like a lot of people really overdo the whole, thing of going in there and trying to, call the ghosts, cowards or whatever. And if, you're a coward, if you don't,
Yeah,
appear, or
it's
you
bad.
don't, yeah. And so, stuff like that. And so we try to avoid that. But I do think sometimes as an investigator, though, you kind of, I don't know, you kind of have to push the limits a little bit, and I don't think I was really pushing any limits, but I was kind of being a little bit more like abrasive, like, hey, like, why don't you reveal yourself? You are this angry. Why are you so angry? Like, why are you so aggressive? Like, why, that type of thing. And I think because if I had not had done that, I don't think we would have gotten the activity we had gotten that night. And that's what I was telling, Tatum and Whitney after that was, you kind of, as an investigator, you kind of have to put yourself in situations like that. I think, like, respectfully, of course, you have to operate within that realm of those boundaries, right? But at the same time, though, if you're just going in there doing the same old thing, and you're not trying different things, different techniques, different whatever, I don't think really at that point you're being a researcher. You're not really being an investigator. You're just, you're doing the same old stuff, and it's not going to yield, the best results you can possibly get, So that's kind of the mindset I try to carry with me.
You hear that, people? Go check out Cole and Tate. They do innovative shit. Not the same old shit you've seen. They mix it. This is a smart dude, and he's got a plan. So that's awesome, man. I love it. This is like another iteration of talking to somebody who is just, we picked up on getting a guest, and we always go into it thinking like this could be a shit show. But every single time we talk to really smart people who have really good insight and really interesting stories, Cole is like the
I
top
just
pick.
love
So,
how
like,
you
I love
just
it.
like backhanded the entire community that could potentially join us.
No,
We
no.
don't
What
think you got good insight, but when
No,
you come
listen.
on, you don't sound like a bunch of dickheads.
I'm a staunch pessimist, unfortunately. And when I
Believe
think
me,
that
I know. I got to deal with
we
you all the time.
when we put our feelers out there for like people to come on the podcast, that means anybody. Like we could get like Joe Bag of Donuts who, hasn't talked to somebody in like 5 years, and he's in his apartment and he just wants to rant and rave. And then we get on, a podcast with him and just like a shit show. We have not had that yet, which is great. We've just talked to the most brilliant, awesome people ever. And then Cole is another example of that. So I think people should go check out Cole and Tate.
I appreciate it, man. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And Cole, our last location to talk about for this evening is the Peace Church Cemetery.
So that one was a fun one. Again, that's the one I referred to earlier that Whitney was with us on. So Peace Church Cemetery, again, it's just a very old cemetery. It's in, I think it's technically Webb City in Missouri, close to Joplin. So we went there to investigate, and just really old cemetery. You got people there buried from...
Wait, hold on one second. You said Joplin?
Close to Joplin, yeah.
Close to Joplin. Dude, that reminds me of that Billy Cook guy we talked about.
Billy Cook is buried
at
church. Yeah. Billy Cook is
no
buried
way.
there. Yeah.
We did a whole podcast on that dude. That's crazy.
Really?
That's
yeah.
crazy.
Yeah. Billy Cook is buried there. He's a notorious serial killer, and he is buried out there. And I think technically it's an unmarked grave, but like he's got family members there. There's members from the Cook family buried there. And so we kind of found like that family plot, and he's got like this, if I remember correctly, he's got like the tiniest little square headstone, and I can't remember what's on. I think it just has Cook on it. I think it's just Cook. And so it's kind of believed that that's where he's buried. That's his headstone or whatever. We did some research there. It's very counterintuitive. We did research. I mean, we always do research before we go into a location, but we did more research afterwards, and we found out more stuff. We found out that one of the spirits, or one of the, things that's said to go on out there, is that there's this watcher, I guess they call it, and he kind of like guards the cemetery. And we didn't know about that till after the location. And the reason I bring that up is because when we were investigating there, Whitney was picking up on this guy watching us, and she was kind of saying like he's kind of giving off like a military vibe, and she was like, I don't think he knows he's dead. And that's something she said in the video. I don't think he knows he's dead. And I was like, well, does he, does it feel like he still thinks he's in war or something? She's like, it's hard to tell, but it could be something like that. But he kind of guards and watches the cemetery, and he's watching us from a distance right now. And then that was kind of crazy, like I said, because later on we researched and we found out there's this watcher, and it was like fits perfectly with what she was saying. So that was kind of cool. Billy, we couldn't get anything from Billy. A lot of people think Billy haunts there. We tried to get evidence from Billy. We didn't really get a whole lot there, unfortunately. And we've gone back there a couple different times, and I've always asked for Billy, and Billy doesn't really come through. So, but yeah, that's pretty much it. I mean, we got stuff in regards to that. It wasn't anything crazy, mainly just stuff on the ITC. I guess the craziest thing we did get though, and this is on my TikTok, and you guys might have seen this. I think it's the TikTok that's gotten the most views on my channel. And I just post, we post on YouTube. I just take highlights from the investigations and just clips and just post it on the TikTok. That's all I do. Just what I believe are the highlights and the high points of the investigation. So for that, we were using the Spirit Talker app. And one of the ghosts that said to haunt at Peace Church is this woman named Laura. I don't know a whole bunch about Laura. I don't know much about her background. I can't remember exactly when she died. I want to say it was like mid 1900s maybe. But a lot of people believe, they see this woman in white who haunts the cemetery and they call her Laura and they believe it's Laura. And so we were by Laura's headstone and we were asking, Laura, are you here? Can you let us know you're here? And sure enough, when we're at her gravestone, we get the name Laura. And I've never gotten that name on any of the ITC stuff or anything like that, but we got the name Laura. And that was just such a crazy moment because it was literally right as we're there by her headstone asking, is Laura here? And we got that name. And I've never gotten that name since then on Spirit Talk or anything like that. And that was just a really crazy, wild moment. Definitely a highlight for sure.
Yeah. Like the odds. Like I actually I saw that TikTok. That was one of the ones I was able to view before we talked today, and that really that widened my eyes because you think about the app and you think about what's possible to come across that, and the likelihood that you're at a specific site of that name that comes across. It's not like you're asking it to generate names, right? It's like it's generating random words, right?
Right.
Am I wrong?
Yeah, so it's kind of like the apps are speculative, and you got to be careful with the apps, and I use them because I'll use anything that I think we could get. And like I said, Tatum and I at first were really very I don't know about the apps or whatever, like Spirit Talker or whatever. A lot of the really popular channels use them. Paranormal Files uses Spirit Talker, Twin Paranormal, they use it. And we just have used it at so many locations that have just gotten such relevant responses, like the Laura thing, like at Sally House, we were getting a lot of really interesting stuff. At Velisca, we had super relevant stuff. I could go on and on. Most recently at the daycare, we were getting extremely relevant stuff where I'm running Spirit Talker, Tatum's running Spirit Talker, and we're getting two completely different, devices, all in airplane mode and everything like that. And we're getting almost the same exact responses. And even on different ITC, stuff from GhostTube, these are apps developed by investigators, where we're getting extremely similar, very relevant stuff revolving around the daycare, stuff about children playing and things like this. Anytime we go to locations, and we've tried it, if we'll go to a location that's not haunted, we've run Spirit Talker at Tatum's house, for example, and we'll get Viking stuff like that. And it's obviously it's just random stuff. But when we go to these locations that are relevant, we do get very relevant stuff. Now, obviously, you have to pair that with other means, other pieces of equipment to kind of verify that. You should not ever just go investigate location, in my opinion, if you're doing a proper investigation with just Spirit Talker. You should have the REM pod devices. If you have that, you should definitely do EMF sweeps, definitely EVP sessions. You want to try to get stuff to corroborate stuff that you get from other pieces of equipment. And me and Tatum are big believers in that, which is why, like I said, when we do Estes method, we run as much equipment as possible, because if in David's situation at Jesse Creek, he's saying something that he's hearing during the Estes method, and we have REM pod temperature fluctuation going on at the same time, as well as stuff on the ICC app, Spirit Talker or whatever. But it runs similar to what would be the Periscript device, where it's just, or an Ovilus, where it has a magnometer. It just uses the phone's magnometer, and it kind of detects fluctuations in that, where something messes with the magnometer and it selects a word. It's going to generate words, and a lot of it's going to be random because it's just detecting, fluctuations in the environment. It's not always going to be a relevant response. It's going to give responses. It's going to shoot random words. But what you're looking for is stuff that is relevant to questions you're asking, or stuff that's relevant to the location itself or what's going on, things like that, if that makes sense.
No, it does. And the reason why I love this so much is because you're implementing a scientific method, which is that you're going into the environment with a preconceived notion of what you're going to be researching, but you're not grasping at straws. What you're saying is, if you're a paranormal investigator, you can either choose to be more scientific about it and be more calculated and objective in what you're getting after, or you can choose to grasp at any straw you get. Like,
Right.
oh, they said Viking, and people talked about possible Vikings around here. No, it's
Right.
not like you got to really scrutinize what's going on, and you gotta be willing to throw away like 90% of what's coming through as noise.
Right.
But the signals that come through, like Laura, every once in a while, that's significant. And I'm going to be honest with you, man. I think you should write a manual. I think the way you described it, you're very intuitive and you're very well spoken. And I think if you wrote a manual on this and you actually said everything you're saying now, I think people would listen. So that's just my 2 cents.
Well, I appreciate that, man. That means a lot to me. I don't know. I kind of wing it, to be honest with you. I'm good at sounding smart, but a lot of times I go out there and I don't always apply it. So
I don't know, man. I'm a scary judge of character when it comes to bullshit, and I think I know you're good at speaking, but I don't sense any bullshit in your speak. So you're a good orator,
neither do
and I
I,
think that's
man.
good. Yeah, it's good.
I appreciate that, guys. Thank you. Yeah, I gotta give a lot of props to Tate. I mean, because Tatum is very good about that as well. When if we do get hits, because when we were recently at the Witch's Grave at Union, that's another video that's going to be uploaded soon to the channel. But nothing like crazy happened there. But she's good at kind of helping debunk things a little bit. We had the REM pod out there. We're out there at nighttime, so we had some lights and stuff like that. And the REM pod itself has the red light on it. It was going off, and it was like, something was breaking the REM and like actually touching the antenna, and it'll light up all these different colors and make all these noises and stuff. And at first I was kind of being stupid. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's going off. Like, this kind of, it's never gone off before. And she's like, I think bugs are touching it. And sure enough, we found out, bugs were touching it.
But see, that's why it's great, man. Like,
Right.
you will call it out and be like, oh, yeah, this is just bugs. Like, but there are other times where there are no bugs. Yeah. I love it, man. That's great.
I got one final question for you, then I'll toss it to Dean for his final question.
Okay.
My question for you is, what advice would you give to anyone that wants to start paranormal investigation venture?
I definitely say, there's a lot I could say. Number one, I'm not trying to virtue signal or anything like that, but I would say definitely go about things the right way. Don't be trespassing on people's property and stuff. A lot of people will do that. The problem with that is when that happens is that kind of gives researchers, investigators kind of a bad rap, to where if people actually want to reach out to someone who owns, a certain piece of property that might have activity or something like that, and you want to reach out and, hey, can I investigate there? They might have a bad taste in their mouth because so many people have, trespass or, broken into somewhere, to investigate, or whatever. I've always encouraged people, go about it the right way. If it's a location that's on private property, make sure you actually reach out to the owners and see, because you'll be surprised. A lot of times people think oh, that would never work. But a lot of times people are very open to that. I can't reveal the location yet, but we're hoping to go to this. There's a place in Missouri that we're wanting to go to. It's currently some type of business. I can't remember exactly what the business is, but it used to be like an Oddfellows home. A lot of people think there's activity going on there. And, we've been able to reach out, and we're hoping, because it seems like the owners are kind of open to us investigating there. I use that as an example. Reach out to people, do things the right way, the legal way. Don't be breaking in places or whatever. And it's not safe either. There's a lot that could go wrong in situations like that. So, be safe, do things the legal way. And honestly, safety too, from a spiritual sense. Again, not to sound corny or virtue signal, but we were talking about Sally House earlier. I do believe there's evil entities out there. I do believe there's evil spirits. I do believe in demons and things like this. And so definitely make sure you're spiritually protected. I think having a strong faith is very important, because if there's any cracks, so to speak, these entities will do that. And attachments, things following you home, that does happen. So you just, not to scare people or whatever, but you just have to, be strong in your faith. I always invoke St. Michael the Archangel. I like saying the St. Michael the Archangel prayer before I leave a location. That's something I personally do. So definitely just safety, spiritual safety for sure is another big piece of advice I'd give.
This is kind of just a side nudge, tongue in cheek sort of thing. But honestly, if imagine if we can get someone who was scientifically based, purely the people who are skeptical. I feel like if we got them on with you, they would get a run for their money, because, you do implement a lot of really great insight, and you're very calculated, as we mentioned. So I don't know. I wish we can get Brian Cox and Neil deGrasse Tyson on here, and then we'll just kind of have a discussion. Because they always people in that community, they're oh, these guys are full of shit. They don't know. This is so unscientific. But no, you can totally apply a scientific method to this sort of thing. You're literally just curious about what's going on in our world around us. That's what I love about this conversation, because you're very unique, honestly, Cole. Like, I'm not just filling you full of gas. Like, you know, the people we've talked to, they've all been great. They've told great stories, but you're the first one who approached this with a very objective and scientific sort of perspective, and also covering all your bases. Like you explain things, but then you go back and say, well, wait a minute, like, you know, don't forget about this and this. Like the first thing you said about how people getting into paranormal investigation just don't go into other people's property. Brilliant, man. Like no one would think to say that, but you're spot on, because you're not just saying it's not just a damage to the person, or a damage or potential damage to what they're going to get their themselves involved with, but they're hurting the community, like the people who are taking it seriously. So
Right.
I love it. My last question, as I kind of hinted to you earlier, is, and I'm even more infatuated now because you're speaking about how you say the archangel prayer and stuff like that. Like, I want to get your perspective on this. So you've dabbled in cryptids, you've dabbled in paranormal, you've dabbled in aliens and discussions about UFO encounters, all that stuff. In your wildest imagination, I mean, to me, I'll be honest, like, it doesn't seem like these things would intrinsically exist, like coexist in the same reality. Like, if there are aliens who are pure organic creatures who were evolved beyond us and they're visiting us, it seems likely that they would be evolved beyond any kind of like religions that exist in this world. But even if you want to tie it in like even more deeply, there are religions in this world that are completely counterintuitive to other religions. So like there could be an entire religious sect that just does not jive with another religious sect, yet every religion has its own paranormal experiences, religious experiences, or whatever. And if you tie that back into aliens and cryptids that don't seem to go along with that, why in your wildest imagination are people having these varied experiences? And what do you think is really going on at the true core of the nature of our reality? Is it virtual reality? Is it, you know, we're kind of manifesting things like tulpas, like we're just making things appear as we believe them, or do these things actually exist in different forms for whatever reason?
All right, and that's a very great question, and that's a very deep question, and it's hard to do something like that justice, and especially for me, because I'm probably going to go all over the place here soon, but
Please
trying
do,
to
man.
answer that as best I can with and I can only answer for my personal beliefs or whatever. I do think a lot of stuff when it comes to just the paranormal, and I use that term as just sort of like an overarching term of all this stuff, like the cryptid stuff, the alien stuff, the ghost stuff. I think it's all connected. I think it is all connected, and I don't really view it. And a lot of people, so like earlier we were talking about like the Sasquatch, the cryptid stuff, right? You have people who believe that you are dealing with just flesh and blood, just creatures that live out in the woods or whatever,
Organic, yeah.
Yeah, just organic flesh and blood. They, whatever. And I've talked to researchers who've told me, when I've asked them about, the Sasquatch thing of, could they be something more than just a flesh and blood creature? Like, could they be something else more that we don't fully understand? I've been told by some research, to quote one almost exactly, they eat, they drink, they shit, and they die, just like everything else, that's in this world. That's what they do, and people come at it from, I don't want to say closed-minded, but I guess that really is probably the best phrase for it. And because that's just what I believe. I think it's a very closed-minded view of what's out there. If you come at it all from a very naturalistic perspective, that, even the weird stuff like the aliens, like the cryptids and stuff, if they are real, these are just natural parts of our reality of the physical world. If aliens exist, they are from, far away solar systems and other planets or whatever. They're ETs, they're just extraterrestrials, and they've evolved and whatever. But I think even when you look at, again, like I said, I'm going to be jumping all over the place, but like the UFO thing, to me, and I'm not as well researched on this, so you guys can definitely jump in and correct me if I'm wrong, but to me, what it seems like most UFO researchers, people who have studied and researched, UFO abductions and abduction phenomena, and like people who've experienced that, it seems to be that the consensus largely from like most of the researchers right now is that these are interdimensional entities. Even like
Right.
the UFOs themselves, a lot of times are not even really currently by a lot of researchers aren't necessarily being viewed as just spacecraft anymore, but like more like organic matter itself, like the UFOs themselves, the unidentified objects, are like have an intelligence to themselves with how they move and certain things like this. Like they're not even, this whole idea of, this is just a spacecraft is kind of almost like an outdated thing as well. Like these are entities of some kind, I believe. And I think again, it is connected. Just when you look at, for example, the Mothman stuff, to name another cryptid, you're talking about something that, has the mind speak thing going on with the telepathy and certain things in regards to that. You have the same with the Sasquatch, the Dogman, werewolf stuff, where people swear they're encountering these creatures and, experiencing more than just the telepathy, the mind speak. That's the main one that comes to mind. But same stuff that happens afterwards with, their psychology after the fact, with PTSD and the trauma and things that follows them when people have an encounter with these entities and creatures, whether it be UFO or whatever, people having to undergo through like hypnosis to even recall their experiences. This is something I've seen in cryptids and in UFO abductions. And I think it all connects to the fact that we're talking about, in my opinion, when it comes to this stuff, the demonic stuff, the whatever, and I'm not saying everything's demons either, obviously, I don't believe that, but I think it all comes from the fact that we're talking about interdimensional stuff here. These are, at least with the cryptids and the aliens and stuff, we're talking about entities and things that come from different dimensions, different realities, whatever those realities are. And I don't know how that works. I don't know if it'd be different realities, for whatever, I don't know. But I do think these things are connected. And I think you have to, if you're going to say they're not connected and you're going to try to isolate all this stuff, you have to ignore a lot of clear similarities in these reports. With the UFO and the abduction stuff, how many of these abductees have described having mind speak experience? Like that's like such a common thread, even with like NDE experiences of people talking to higher, angels or whatever, people saying like, these are mind speak experiences. It's through telepathy. Like this is common thread amongst all these things. And I think it points to the fact that you were dealing with spiritual stuff, interdimensional stuff, really, ultimately, when it comes to this. Maybe not always, but I think a lot of times with this phenomena, that's what it is. So that's kind of the best way I can answer that.
I think that was, and you just sparked so many ideas in my head. And the last thing I'll say that I think is worth mentioning, it's a heavy concept. Here seems to be the true fact of what we're experiencing in reality with all these things going on. It's either, like anything else, there's a dichotomy. It's either one or the other. But every single instance, or many, almost all the instances of the paranormal, the extraterrestrial, the cryptid, we're talking about seeing creatures that are like us in some form, bipedal, arms and legs, two eyes, like any other creature on this world where, there's like not any other creature, but most other creatures, like they have eyes, they have ears, they have some form of limbs, something like that. Like that's just how nature exists on this world. So when people report seeing these things, even if it's like a 9-foot mantis-like alien creature, it's still got vestiges of what we experience on our globe today. But if you look at science and like the Fermi paradox, like if you take any kind of mathematical principle, any life form that evolved elsewhere in this universe should look drastically different with the eyes and the arms and all. Like it should not look like us at all, anything on this planet. So the fact that it does in so many instances, that speaks volumes, right? So it's either one or the other. It's either something that is influencing our perception of what's going on, like from the outside in, meaning it's projecting something, like you said, mind speak, something is being put into us and we're manifesting it in a way that makes sense to us, which is everything we see in our reality around us on this globe. Or the other side is we're basically making this up. And, there the sad, like there could be the sad fact that like most of these instances, or if not all, are manifestations of our own reality. But we know that unicorns don't exist, yet we can envision them, we could draw them, we could imagine them. To me, it's either one or the other. And I don't know, maybe that's too black and white.
No, yeah, I think you make a lot of great observations and stuff. And yeah, I'm with you. I think, I don't know. It's hard to, because again, there's so many different avenues to talk about something like this, and we should definitely come back on and get back all together and really dissect it a little bit more. I think this is really,
it's fun to talk about, right? Like,
yeah,
it's like, it's just fun. Like if anything, it's just fun to talk about. Like we're alive. Why not just talk about it? It's awesome.
Absolutely.
So Cole, thank you so much for coming on today's show. Your stories were really insightful,
Yeah, me
and
too.
the side conversations that we had that we did not expect prior to you coming on. And we're definitely going to have you back on the show because I would love to hear your wife Tatum's haunted house stories.
Oh yeah.
So it sounds like she has a crap ton of
Yeah,
experiences, and that could probably be a show in itself. So we'll definitely, get something scheduled again with you guys.
absolutely.
But before we close out, why don't you tell the listeners where they could find your videos, your social media, and how to reach you?
So YouTube channel, obviously that's our our main thing is Cole and Tate. Just that's it. Cole and Tate. So same with TikTok. Like I said earlier, we post highlights, investigations on TikTok. Hopefully here soon we'll start maybe like live streaming on TikTok. We thought about doing that when we go to some of these places. So, definitely follow us there. Again, that's also Cole and Tate on TikTok. Same profile picture and everything like that. We're on Instagram. Should also, I guess, be Cole and Tate. I think it's been a while since I've been on the Instagram. So if you're trying to get in contact with me, I think you should be able to message me on there or whatever, comment on one of my photos or something. I don't know. But yeah, that's kind of, and I think my email also, I want to say, is in the description on the YouTube channel. So that's probably honestly the best way to get a hold of us is if you want to email us. It should be like coleandt@gmail.com.
You heard them, folks. Go give them a follow. Check out their YouTube channel. They post some really interesting things, especially after this conversation here today. Definitely go give them a follow. Thank you so much for listening to today's show. And for one of our previous guests and avid listener, Rag on the Hag.
Rag on the Hag. We thought that went away, but it's coming back.
It's coming back. Thanks for tuning into today's episode of The Wandering Road. You can find us on Apple, Google, Spotify, and most podcast platforms. Be sure to subscribe and share. Also, don't forget to give a follow on Instagram at twroadpodcast and follow my TikTok at twrpodcast. Take care, and I'll catch you on the next one.